A bipartisan delegation of US lawmakers meeting the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala at the headquarters of the Tibetan government in exile. The unprecedented visit facilitated by India. The US group gave an assurance that President Biden will soon sign the Resolve Tibet Act, aimed at enhancing US support for resolving the Tibet dispute with China.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with his message of knowledge and tradition and compassion and purity of soul and love, he will live a long time and his legacy will live forever. But to you, President of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything.
The delegation also said they would not let China decide on the Dalai Lama's successor.
And I tell our Chinese friends, this message is for you because you're waiting for this Dalai Lama to die. They are not bothered about the living 14th Dalai Lama, but they are more concerned about the yet to come 15th Dalai Lama to use the reincarnation as a political tool.
But allowing the visit by the US group on Indian soil, a not so subtle message to China. The Modi government making it clear to the Chinese that non-resolution of the boundary crisis can result into many thorny issues coming to the fore. The Chinese embassy in India already had a sharp reaction. They posted, "We urge the US side to fully recognize the anti-China separatist nature of the Dalai group, honor the commitments the US has made to China, stop sending the wrong signal to the world." The Dalai Lama, who will be visiting the US soon for medical treatment, had a message of peace.
We should take care of this world. World, irrespective of what religion, what tradition.
In recent months, there have been attempts to normalize strained ties with China, but this visit could lead to a backlash. Gargi Rawat for NDTV.
And joining me on the show, Tenzing Lekshe is spokesperson and Additional Secretary, Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration. He's joining me from Dharamshala. We have Professor Yukteswar Kumar, former first Asian Deputy Mayor of Bath, United Kingdom. He's joining me from London. Brahma Chelani, Strategic Affairs expert. Ambassador Manjeev S. Puri, India's former representative to the UN and Nepal. Andrew K.P. Leung, international and independent China strategist, joining me from Hong Kong. And we also have Michael Kugelman, director of South Asia Institute, the Wilson Center, joining me from Washington, D.C. Mr. Lekshe, beginning with you, there were certain expectations from the delegation, and there were certain expectations, I'm sure, from your end as well. Have those expectations been met?
Definitely. Because this today is a very auspicious day, very significant day for all of us, not just in Tibetans in exile, but Tibetans inside Tibet also. Because the delegation, the US congressional delegation came over here for over the last many years, worked on the Resolve Tibet Act, which they have unanimously or in an overwhelmingly majority, they have succeeded in passing the resolution. Now it is in the President Biden's desk to sign it. And they were also very hopeful. We are also very hopeful that very soon the President Biden will sign it and make it into law. So what I think, the most important thing is it is not about, we shouldn't look into the prism of rivalry between China and America, but Tibet issue is unresolved till date. And who should be the one to come forward? We being consistently telling China that we want to negotiate on the Sino-Tibetan conflict. But at the same time, China were reluctant all through the time. And what they've been doing so far inside Tibet was repression, suppression, torture, all the violations of human rights. So therefore, I think the message is very clear to China to come to the table and resolve the Sino-Tibetan conflict.
Yes, but how hopeful are you that they will actually come to the table, given the belligerence that we are seeing from the Chinese side, and many would say some unwarranted, statements or messaging?
See, the excuses, the belligerence, how long it will work for China? So far, they've been doing this so long. Now they do not have any choice they have no choice at all but to be benign, but to be benevolent. But China is not. So I think, Tibet issue is not the Tibetan issue alone. It's a global issue because we are part of the global community. So therefore, I think China has to take serious considerations about the proposals which we have given to the Chinese, and we have given not just verbally, but also through the documents. Right now, China have been accusing His Holiness as separatist. Look at what His Holiness has been saying for so long, the middle way policy, the genuine autonomy, right, to live with China for the mutually beneficial solution. So therefore, I think whatever China claims was totally false and lie.
Okay. So I'm going to come back to you in just a bit because I want to understand what after this visit. Will there be follow-ups? And are you hopeful for a solution as you seem to be now? Michael, are there domestic political considerations at play here? Because perhaps this delegation was looking at the audience back home in America, keeping in mind the November election. Because what's really the primary objective of a US delegation visit to Dharamshala to meet the Dalai Lama?
Yeah, that's it's a great question. If you look at recent history here in the U.S., issues of Tibet and Tibet democracy have really resonated across many portions of U.S. society. There have been concert series. There's one in particular very prominent called the Tibetan Freedom Festival that's become very prominent. You have a number of American celebrities like Richard Gere, for example, that are very prominent advocates on behalf of the Tibet cause. And members of Congress, including those that met with the Dalai Lama, they're elected officials. So they'll be impacted by that type of sentiment across society. So I think there's that. But keeping in mind here that members of Congress are not U.S. officials, and so they don't represent the executive branch, and so they don't represent U.S. policy. So this was a visit made not by U.S. officials, but by members of Congress. But it is notable that U.S. officials, the administration, have been fairly quiet publicly about this visit. And the fact that you have not heard, so far as I know, there has not been any U.S. official that has spoken publicly and distanced the Biden administration from this visit, from these members of Congress. That's significant, and I think that will upset Beijing even more. But absolutely, answer to your question is we do have to look at the domestic considerations here. In an election year in the U.S., the fact that there's a significant amount of support within American society for the Tibet cause, and I do think that we should look at this visit to some extent through that lens.
Yes, because, Professor Kumar, just look at the words which have been used by former United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She says that you, the president of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything. The Dalai Lama would not approve of any of my saying that when I criticize the Chinese government. And of course, she is saying here that His Holiness Dalai Lama, with his message of knowledge, tradition, compassion, purity, will live a long time and his legacy will live forever. But on the other hand is the president of China who will be gone and forgotten. These are very strong words. My question is, how is UK viewing this visit?
Well, these might be strong words, but these are truthful words, as Dalai Lama also acknowledged, because UK, India, and other democratic countries like Quad, I believe that this is an opportunity for the values of human rights, which are enshrined in the Quad, and this visit should be looked upon as a foundation of shared democratic principles. This kind of visits by Nancy Pelosi, who also visited Taiwan, by the way, a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And these are important.
In August 2022, she was in Taiwan, and even then, Beijing had responded very strongly.
Yes, not only in 22, but also a few months ago, a bipartisan U.S. delegation visited Taiwan, led by Mike Goldhar and there was another congressman who is from Indian background. So I remember it very well just a couple of months ago. But the main point is that even Dalai Lama does not ask for complete freedom. He wants a peaceful resolution to the Tibetan issue, and portraying by the Chinese foreign ministry and the Communist Party leader as dangerous separatist, and calling him as in a very bad taste like animals is a gross distortion of reality. We should and
Okay,
the UK
so
is with India. Yes, please.
Is China and UK Leung not realizing the changed geopolitical realities, that there is a new axis, that there should be a realization of a post-COVID new, diplomatic equations?
I don't think so. Whether it was in 2022.
That's a question to Andrew Leung.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Well, China is more than alive to all these rhetoric, anti-China rhetoric across the board. There was the Tibet, there was in Xinjiang, there was in Taiwan, there's Hong Kong, all over the place. And I think China's getting used to it. But China's position on Tibet has been consistent for many, many decades. If we look at history, and then, of course, the history is a long, long time, over several thousand years long. And then throughout this period, Tibet has been very much part of China for a very, very long time. And then if you look at the livelihood of the Tibetan people, I mean, the Tibetan
Mr.
people...
One would say that U.S. support for Tibetan autonomy and human rights is something which has been there for long as well.
I mean, that you look at the history, you look at what's happening now, China, of course, is respecting the Tibetan region. Even the Tibetan language is now a part of the language written on the Chinese renminbi note. If you look at the Chinese currency, the Tibetan language is there, is part of the languages inside the Chinese currency. And of course, the religion is still highly respected. But what China cannot tolerate is this rhetoric trying to separate Tibet from China. And then I think that what Nancy Pelosi and her gang is trying to do, because they're riding on a bipartisan consensus of being firm and antagonistic against China. And I think in the election year, we can expect more of this to come.
Okay. Mr. Lekshay, would you respond to that?
Of course. See, what is China consistent of, right? Only of lies, right? Right now, one of our Chinese speakers says about history. The history, there is this inconsistent of history, what China has been saying. Over the last many decades, China says that Tibet was part of China since 7th century. And then they talk about Tibet being part of 13th century. Then now under Xi Jinping, they are saying time antiquity. Now there is this inconsistency. Because why? Because this is not true, right? Tibet was never part of China. And history tells that. So we cannot rewrite the history for the convenience of the present political situations. And as a matter of fact, now, His Holiness, all through the time, spoke about middle way and the genuine autonomy. His Holiness never spoke about independence. Since 1979, when the door is opened by Deng Xiaoping, His Holiness always talked about being with China for the mutually beneficial solution. So I think Chinese leaders need to wake up and look into the documents, look into all the records, and just prove us when His Holiness talks about separatism. So I think this inconsistency is part of the Chinese leaders, right, as of now. And this, the high-level delegation visit over here is a clear message to China that they cannot wait for and make a blame excuses, right, And they've been doing that for so long. Why? Because they are isolationists too long. But Tibet, as I said before, is a part of the global community, and it has a right to preserve its own culture, language, law.
Is this messaging being sent, Brahmachalani, not just by US but also by India, given the fact that Dharamshala is the seat of power of Tibet's government in exile for over 6 decades now? And that served as the venue of this meeting.
Well, let us not forget that this is not the first time
yes.
that a US congressional delegation has called on Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. Nancy Pelosi has been to Dharamsala in the past, not once, but several times. Bipartisan US congressional delegations have visited Dharamsala. So this is not something new. This is not a first-time occurrence. But I think we need to look at what's happening in a larger context. Tibet is the core issue in India-China relations. It is at the center of the China-India divide. China became India's neighbor, not because of geography, but because of its occupation of Tibet. It imposed itself as India's neighbor by occupying Tibet in 1951. Today, the issues regarding Tibet are becoming more significant because China is seeking to stamp out Tibetan cultural identity, Tibetan language. It's trying to synthesize Tibetan Buddhism. And also, it is working to anoint the next Dalai Lama. That's why it's very important for the United States and India to work together to foil China's strategy to handpick the next Dalai Lama. China has managed to tighten its control on Tibet. If it can appoint the next Dalai Lama, its grip on Tibet will become formidable and unbreakable. That's the reason why we need to look ahead, look at how the US and India can work together, how they can fashion a multilateral strategy to thwart China's designs to install a puppet Dalai Lama.
Okay, so the succession has to be decided by the Dalai Lama rather than India or, say China. So here, what role can India necessarily play?
Well, the Dalai Lama's instructions, the rules that he sets out on how his successor should be chosen, those words will be the final words. But how to execute his will requires political backing. That's where the support of China, of United States and India is crucial. The US and India have to play a very important role. The Dalai Lama is going to the US for knee treatment. If he undergoes knee replacement surgery, the recovery time can extend up to a year. So he's going to be in the US for a considerable period of time if the doctors decide that a knee replacement surgery can be done. The fact is that that Dalai Lama's age is pretty advanced, that he's been having some health issues. So we're not sure whether surgery would be recommended by the doctors, but if they do, he's going to be in the US for some time.
Yes, and,
the US
and
also
all these developments,
recently,
Ambassador Manjeev Puri, is happening at a time when there are huge investments that are being done by China in that entire region. In fact, China claims that some 300 million Buddhists of various schools have been involved in setting up of various projects, $97 billion massive infrastructure projects, which includes airports, highways that cut through the world's highest mountains, are all being planned there.
Maria, thank you very much. all your interlocutors have made valid points on different subjects. But I think the fundamental one, and if I can take on from what Mr. Chelani was mentioning, in a sense, fundamental, quite apart from geopolitics and the messaging between the two superpowers and what is happening in US elections, and the fact that when you are passing or signing the Resolve Tibet Act, you should also be seen to be resolving to do something. There are all these important signals, etc. But fundamentally, isn't it about the hearts and minds of the Tibetan people? Everybody agrees that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the leader. Of course, he is the spiritual leader, but acknowledged by everyone as the leader of the Tibetan people, including, I dare say, those who are under the Chinese rule in Tibet itself. Now, physically, of course, China is in control of the place. People who've been there tell you about huge and massive development. See change in that plateau and that region. All that is true. But, hearts and minds, to win them, you require a lot of these kind of things, physical goodies. But, then there are some issues which are about who you are, your identity, your mind, and so many other factors. Each of these is equally important. And that's what the Chinese are trying to do through the one means which they have, which is the physical side of things, which is the materialistic side of things. But, there is much more to all of that. And I think that's also very important. And so, in a sense, all of us are about the hearts and minds of the Tibetan people, quite apart from the geopolitical messaging and what is happening in the rest of the world, the US-China issues, India and China, all of that is important. But, the Tibetan people are also very important and critical to this entire thing.
Yes, it's
for
about
a variety
people.
Of reasons.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ambassador.
Yes.
Here it is about people. And is the bill actually addressing that? Or is this about, discussing the economic and social development and other aspects without realizing how it can facilitate the much needed support that the people of Tibet need now at this juncture? Ambassador.
So, Maria, should I answer that?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Look, the bill is, of course, geopolitics. Tibet is, if you don't mind my saying so, a very important element, but it is being used in that sense. The bill is about resolve Tibet. That's what the legislation says. It talks in terms of fair development, sustainability, respecting their human rights, etc. But the underlying factors are not unknown to anyone, including the people in Tibet. The United States, as the leader of the free world, if I may say so, is standing up for rights, human rights, freedoms, etc. And for the Tibetan people, whose subjugation is now more than 50 years old, what exactly is left if the world, the so-called free world, India gave space to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He was an honored guest, remains an honored guest, and we've done everything that we can do for ourselves. But the big, huge G7 world, the United States, thank you for all that you did. But at this critical moment, what is it actually that you can do? This signaling is important, but of course, along with the signaling, it is that will you stand by the feeling of the people, the way the people wish it to happen? And of course, they'll be subjugated to a great deal of pressure, both, let me say, palliative in terms of material benefits, etc., but also pressure. It's invariably carrot along with a stick. But will you, the rest of the world, stand with it, or you will play your geopolitics?
Okay.
We have to see how it unfolds.
Okay.
Bills
so,
are fine,
Michael Kugelman,
but
will
actions
it go,
are what matter.
How sincere is US in ensuring that this Resolve Tibet legislation, which one of the leaders actually said, who was part of the delegation, that President Joe Biden will actually be signing it soon. The question here is, how does it really resolve the issue, besides just sending a message that US stands with Tibet at this point?
Right. I mean, as you know, the U.S. is looking for ways to try to find areas of cooperation with China, even amid this intense rivalry and competition. So it would be a big risk, I think, for the president to actually go ahead and sign this bill. You know, the way the bill is described, the way it actually reads, it's meant to promote negotiations between China and between and Tibet representatives. But the way that that it's been pitched by those that support it, by those members of Congress that have put it out, including those that met with the Dalai Lama, basically bringing attention to Chinese acts against Tibet. So one could argue that it is somewhat, it might be perceived as partisan, ideologically driven in ways that will not please Beijing at all. And that's something that could have impacts for U.S. policy as it looks to try to figure out ways to work with China, even as it pursues this competition. So it certainly is a risk for sure. And I'm not sure that the president will go ahead and sign this as quickly as some observers think might be the case. We'll see. But I do think that there is a good chance that President Biden will sign it. There seems to be a genuine desire on the part of the administration to see dialogue, some type of negotiation, though I don't necessarily think that it would happen per the terms laid out in this bill. And either way, no matter how this plays out, Beijing is unhappy, will continue to be unhappy about how the U.S. has gone about the
Okay, so
Tibet
then what
issue.
can Beijing do? Andrew K.P. Leung, you know, if it is about sending a message, what can Beijing do and how will it really impact its agenda globally?
Of course, Beijing, as I said, has got used to this kind of twisted rhetoric. For example, this narrative entirely ignores the history of Tibet throughout the centuries, ignores how much the lives of the Tibetan people have improved from their serfdom under the previous regime, and also ignores that how religion, the Tibetan religion, is still allowed to be practiced widely. And then I think that this is all is outrageous that one country should pass an act on an internal part of another country. It is as if China was asked to pass an act on the separation of taxes, for example, in the United States. I mean, isn't that outrageous? So I think that China is too angry for words, as I said, if the United States should pass this bill. But of course, it's to be understood as this part of politics in an election year. And then even though the United States wants to work with China, on the other hand, there's bipartisan consensus that they should confront China. So the confrontation is much, much stronger than the cooperation.
Okay, so then what could be a potential fallout of this, Brahmachalani?
Fallout of what?
Of this meeting which has happened and the messaging that is coming from it.
There'll be no
Elections
fallout
are over
from
in
the
India,
meeting.
though.
First, there'll be no political or international fallout from this meeting in Dharamsala. The bigger issue is this. Joe Biden, during his 2020 campaign, pledged to meet with the Dalai Lama, unlike Donald Trump. Now, Dalai Lama will be in the US shortly. Will Biden fulfill his campaign pledge and call on His Holiness? The second test that Biden faces is that after Congress has passed this new Tibet policy bill, will he sign it into law? If he signs it into law, the White House will issue a statement on the occasion. That statement will be significant. So we have to wait and see whether Biden will finally speak up on Tibet. He is nearing the end of his term. The fact is that the Biden administration has been reluctant to speak up on Tibet. So the US congressional team's visit to Dharamsala should not obscure the fact that the Biden administration has been trying to pursue a softer, more conciliatory approach to Beijing, largely because America's deepening involvement in the war in Ukraine creates the specter for Washington of China aligning itself with Russia. That would mean that the US will realize its worst geopolitical nightmare, a Sino-Russian axis. So to prevent that scenario, Biden has been compelled to adopt a softer, more conciliatory approach to Beijing. So we have to wait and see whether he will sign this bill into law, whether he will call on the Dalai Lama when he is hospitalized in the US. These two actions will speak volumes.
Okay. And I want to understand from you, Mr. Lekshe, how much do you think the American public opinion is shaping the decision to meet the Dalai Lama? And that is the reason why this visit.
See, as Michael has already pointed out, that why there is an overwhelming majority of support in the Congress, because when you look at Tibet policies, right, they are Tibet policy. There is this Tibet Policy Act, there is this Tibet Policy Support Act, there is Tibet Reciprocal Act. They were all being signed, right, and being adopted by both the House, both the Congress, right. So there is an overwhelming majority of support, not just within the congressmen, but also in all over America, right. And not just in America, but even in India, in Europe. Right. For example, just recently, the European Union delegation visited China. They spoke about the dialogue without preconditions. Right. Quite recently, there was in Canada Parliament, there was unanimously they had adopted resolutions on Tibet, asking for the dialogue. So why China is escaping the dialogue? Why China? Right. When there is a problem, when there is issues within China, I think they need to resolve the issue at the earliest. Otherwise, it will become an international issue again. So now,
okay, but Mr. Lekshe, since the Dalai Lama is traveling to the US for his treatment, is there a possibility of one more meeting, because he hasn't met President Joe Biden till date?
So we don't know as of now. As Professor Dharamshala has said that President Biden has already made a pledge during the election.
And let me make a follow-up question as well, because as Brahmachalani was highlighting that similar meetings have happened in the past as well. So what will this meeting really bring and achieve if it's not just about some more spotlight on this issue? Do you think it will get the much needed international attention and support that the Tibetan cause wants?
See, Maria, for His Holiness, it is about humanity, not just Tibet. When you look at His Holiness commitments, it is not about Tibet, it's about larger humanity. So when you see the clips of His Holiness meeting with this high-level delegation, His Holiness was not talking about Tibet. His Holiness was talking about everybody. That is his concern. And within that everybody, China is also included. So therefore, I think, Andrew, for you, right, you've been talking a lot about China, development, this thing, that thing, and all. But in actual terms, what His Holiness said is not against the Chinese people, right? It is for the Chinese people, for the long run. So this small-time blame game will not work, right? You have to see beyond and in the future what His Holiness message passed on to. So this brings better world. This will bring for the better world. So therefore, I think it is very clear that whenever His Holiness had the meetings, right, whenever His Holiness speaks about, His Holiness not just speak about Tibet. His Holiness speaks about larger humanity.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Tenzing Lekshe, Professor Kumar, Brahmachalani, Ambassador Manjeev Puri, Andrew K. Leong, and Michael Kugelman.